I think it's recording.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Wait a few more minutes, or 1 minute at least, if some other people are joining, and then we will start. I think we're sort of about right.
Do you still have to manually admit the users, or are they automatically joining?
No, they're automatically now. I learned how to use Teams now.
Perfect. I guess we can just start, and people will catch up once they join.
Yeah. So, hey guys, today we're gonna have the nice topic of NIS 2. We're gonna demystify it a little bit. Sitting together here with Andrei. He's many years of experience in cybersecurity, mostly as a pen tester. I don't go through all the certifications because I think we will sit here to the end of the webinar.
It's not that bad.
I'm a consultant from the security scientist. I don't really do pen testing. I focus a little bit more on the GRC part. That's it. Today we're gonna have it on the NIS 2 and mostly the link to risk management. And first, I will start with a short introduction. I won't focus too much on what NIS2 is all about. I assume that most people already know it. I think LinkedIn has been bombarded with NIS2 related articles and posts. We will focus a little bit more mostly on the minimal measures, which is Article 21. So then we will focus a little bit on those specifically minimal measures, and in those minimal measures we will start having a discussion. Mostly what do they mean, how do they rate risk management, and also I think our nice opinion on the topic. So let's start out with the introduction. So I think most of you guys know that in the EU NIS2 is coming out. It's mostly regarding many different industries that now need to comply. I think if you want to read more about that, you can read it on the internet. It's pretty widespread. But what we are mostly going to focus on is Article 21. And Article 21, why we're going to focus on that is because that is it's going to be most relevant to most companies. That's where we're going to be talking about the most, especially if you look at the implementation side of the NIS2. Also for companies that don't have to comply with the NIS2, Article 21 again is the most interesting one because that one lists the minimal measures, and most likely other companies will ask you about these minimal measures. But these minimal measures are cybersecurity risk management measures. So that's already the link that we lay with risk management. They are related to risk. So the level of implementation you're using is completely based on risk. So what you consider a risk is based on what you consider risk. That's the way you should implement them. So it's really all about risk. And then these minimal measures are divided into categories to which you need to comply. So let's start with a nice quote. I, of course, took from my own article. It was never better than to start with your own quote. So that means that the risk assessment is going to be one of the most crucial first steps that you need to take, or any organization needs to take. So these minimal measures won't mean anything unless you have a sense of the risk, which means you need a risk assessment. However, there is a little bit a catch here. So member states, so the countries from Europe, they are asked to do coordinated security risk assessment on the supply chain. So most likely what's going to happen is that you need to implement these minimal measures according to what they say in those risk assessments, if member states are conducting those risk assessments. They're not per se mandatory. So we will see if that happens. So it's not just all your own risk assessment. It's not like, hey, let's consider nothing a risk, so I have to do nothing. That's not the case here. So yeah, expect potential risk assessment with risk that will dictate the level of risk you are supposed to take or should take, etc. Now, with that all out of the way now let's look at these specific minimal measures. And this is Article 21. These are the minimal measures, cybersecurity risk management measures. Now, here's where Andrei also will come in. He will ask me some questions, maybe.
Yes.
He tells me that he has almost no background in NIS 2.
So all the background that I have was reading a bit of articles, especially your article on how you covered the NIS 2. And then I also saw the Article 21. And coming from a more technical background, for me, these seem a bit quite ambiguous and not clear. So that's why I wanted to have a discussion with you to see maybe other people are also like not sure what exactly this means. So I think it will bring a lot of value for people to like hear your opinion on what exactly do they mean. And I think I would like to start first with the supply chain one. I think it's the number D. Yeah, exactly this one. So if we read it, it says something like supply chain security, including security related aspects concerning the relationships between each entity and its direct suppliers or service providers. So it's a lot of big words, and it's a very wide scope, at least when I read this from a technical background. When I hear supply chain security, maybe I'm thinking about like third-party libraries that the software is using. But what I think is that it means to cover much more. So Vincent, maybe you can tell us like, what exactly do we mean by supply chain? Like, how do we define what is in scope and what is not in scope?
Yeah, so I think that's an already very interesting one, because your first assumption would be to look at your IT suppliers, at your IT related components, but it doesn't specify that at all, right? So it really says supply chain. So that could be even if you have an office, that could be your cleaners that are coming at the office, cleaning the office. It looks like they are also in scope of this, specific measure. Although it doesn't really define it that well. So my expectation already is like, what is going to happen in practice here? It's like most likely NIS 2 or the security aspect will be put on the IT department. Are they just going to focus on IT suppliers? Is that going to be enough? I don't know. I think that's a very good question. But it doesn't really state it. So I think you're going to get more questions than answers today.
Mm-hmm. Not sure if that was the answer that I was looking for, but it is one answer. So I think you covered a very good point over there. Like I was also thinking about this scenario. For example, let's say we are a software company here in Copenhagen based, and then we have a supplier who is providing cleaning services in our office, right? And in which cases would you think like a cleaning company could be part of a risk assessment? And because you mentioned like in the beginning it will probably be a lot of focus on the IT side, but should it only include the IT parts, or should, for example, the cleaning company be also part of our risk management?
I think it's it's the level of risk. So it wouldn't surprise me that if you have, for example, a lot of physical locations with sensitive information laying around, that cleaning companies are definitely within scope of the supply chain, right? But yeah, it depends. Maybe if those coordinated risk assessment will be sent out, that they will specifically mention these kind of suppliers, that it goes broader. Because otherwise, I think most companies will just stay around the IT-related components. Yeah, also what the comment indeed I see here is like could also be provided to with access to hardware or similarly. So I think practice will kind of tell how far it's gonna take it.
I see. So you would say some companies would include the physical aspect into it, especially for those that have more physical offices, while some will like neglect it and in the beginning just focus on the IT part.
Yeah. That's an also interesting one. I mean, not like I'm cutting the grass before your feet, but this statement is also what's going to make that the NIS2 is going to be worldwide, right? So not just people in scope. I think that's the biggest difference. Like even if you're in America and you have actually nothing to do with Europe, maybe you just have a customer that's in Europe.
Exactly. Yeah, and that was exactly one of the things that I wanted to ask you next. Like, does that mean that, for example, NIS2 compliant companies will try to work only with other companies that are NIS2 compliant? And if that is the case, how will that work out with companies from US, for example, where NIS2 is not a requirement?
I think it will be very much like the GDPR, right? So all of a sudden you see like everybody on the website have like, we are GDPR compliant, whatever that means, right? I think we will start to see the same popping up, so that companies in the USA will have on the website like, we are NIS2 compliant, which is very curious, of course, because every member state needs to implement their own version of the NIS2. So that means that technically the whole requirements could be completely different for each member state. So you should almost like list the requirements of each member state, but I don't think that will happen. But nonetheless, I think it will be pretty widespread. I think it will be one of those things that, indirectly you always do business with any of the big, the mandatory suppliers of the critical infrastructure of Europe. So indirectly, you also need to comply, especially because the scope is also pretty big, right? Like IT service providers are also in there. It's more than just critical physical infrastructure. It's also digital infrastructure.
Exactly. So would you say in the future, some companies would think it's a deal breaker that their supplier is not NIS2 compliant, or it will be cases where it's like totally fine if they are not compliant, because simply it's not part of their risk that their supplier is also compliant?
I think in cases of like if for example you have a very good product or service or I think they won't, especially if it's not per se mandatory, they maybe won't ask for NIS2 compliance, especially if you're really good and outstanding. But if you have some competitors, and they are a little bit on the same level, they will most likely the one with the NIS2 compliance will most likely win. They will get the deal because they have, it's a check in the box, right?
Yeah, they have that edge, that competitive advantage compared with the others. Like, we are on the same level of quality, but hey, we are NIS2 compliant, and you need to be NIS2 compliant. So it makes things much more easier also for you and for us if both of us are compliant, right?
Yeah, exactly. I also see a question here: what scope should you consider? What about service providers of your service providers and so on? I think the answer that Bodil gave is pretty correct, right? So you're kind of responsible for asking your suppliers. Although in how far that will happen, most likely, I don't really think it goes that far, right? So I think if you are not directly under the NIS2, but you are asked from a NIS2 company that needs to be compliant with NIS2, they will just ask you, how are you doing with your supply chain security? If you give them a good enough answer, then most likely you will pass, right? So I don't really think it will spread all too much. Like,
it's a good one. It's a good point. And also, if you see more questions in the chat, just please pick them up, because I think I have some technical difficulties and I cannot see the questions in the chat. So
like always, man. It's like every time you're hosting a webinar, you're not allowed to see the questions.
Whenever you are live, things go south. Let's move to the next one. The next one that caught my eyes, and it's especially this one, which is security in network and information systems acquisition. development and maintenance, vulnerability handling, and disclosure. So when I read this for the first time, I was like, whoa, let's take a step back. Like this is way too many things in just one bullet point. And we previously also discussed about this, like where do you put the comma and where do you put the end, and how exactly do you understand how to separate this. But I will say let's split it based on the comma, and let's start with the security network and information system acquisition. So let's split it into three parts and start with this one. And from a technical perspective, when I hear like security network and information system acquisition, I would say, okay, you have maybe to do a pen test on your network and to make sure that your devices are securely configured, right? But I think this might cover a bit more than that. What is your view on this?
Yeah, so again, I have to say though, it's very interesting to say like you should cut it off at the comma, and I'll do it here for you guys now because this is horrible. You don't know where anything stops or starts, and I think it's taking the comma is a good approach, but you're not totally sure with some of these statements. Let me put it like that.
That's perfect.
But yeah, I think this is a very interesting one. I especially like the mention of the focus on acquisition. I think it's kind of weird. Like, is it only when you buy new equipment and not per se when you have your old systems in place? So it feels like that is a little bit more the scope here. Like they are not really concerned about your current network. They're more concerned about, you buying secure stuff.
Okay. So you would say like everything that you already have, it's fine and you don't have to check it in terms of security, but just make sure that everything new should be secure. Is that how you interpret this, or?
Yeah, that's how I'm interpreting. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
why do you think that would be the case? Why not check also the previous ones? Why check only the new ones?
I think it has maybe to do with the fact that, I think in Europe they kind of take a long-term view. You see it also in different kind of law, right? Like for example, if they make a new law regarding requirements in houses or apartment buildings or whatever, then only the new apartments that are being built need to comply to these requirements. I think this is kind of similar in that case. It's like, hey, that old stuff we cannot really ask them to do too much, so we will just focus on the acquisition part. So that in the future, maybe in like 10 years, and everything is more secure.
I understand. So you would call this like the moment zero. From now on, we are going to have only secure things, and everything before this, we don't know what it is.
Yeah, like those old Windows XP servers you still have running around, those are fine.
Those are fine. We don't look at them. Okay.
But don't buy new stuff, right?
And it's don't totally agree with this approach, but it's very interesting how you interpreted this, because you chose to pick the acquisition for both the security in the network and for the information. When I read it for the first time, I was like, okay, it's acquisition of the information. So it's like, okay, you have to have a network which is secure, and also you have to handle data properly. So all the information that you are acquiring should be properly secured, like in terms of how do you classify data, how do you handle it. But you would say the acquisition is both for the network part and for the data.
I mean, again, don't take my word on it. Like the way they're putting on the commas and the end, and for the fact that this is a legal document, it's really, really weirdly structured, right? You cannot make heads and tails. Like if I go to a customer and I would write a sentence like this, right? I think that I won't have that customer anymore actually for very long, right? I think the sentence structure is very weird. It could be interpreted as your part as well. So you have security network. Then it also says something with development and maintenance.
Let's cover that part actually, because
Yeah, so you could
yeah.
technically, you know, you have, I don't know if doesn't erase it, but you could technically remove the comma part and see it till the next comma. So you don't take that comma, but you take the next comma. Then it makes a little bit more sense.
So regarding
Yeah.
the development and maintenance, again, from a technical perspective and a background that I have, when I hear development and maintenance, I'm thinking about software. Like this might be very targeted for companies that develop their own in-house solution, or for a software company who develops for other companies, right? So is there more in this that can be covered, or is it only this specific case where companies develop their own software?
Yeah, I think it's both. So it's like the development and maintenance of software. So I think it's even if you have a system already, then it's in scope, and then it's maybe considered maintenance. But it's again a very iffy thing, and for a legal document, it's not very specific at all, because what do you mean exactly with development? Like if I, for example, have Teams, right, and I'm configuring it and I'm installing components on it, is that
Yes.
considered development, or is that considered maintenance? Or if the same goes for if I have a low code system, is low code development, or is what do you mean with development, right? I have no clue.
Exactly. Because when I hear maintenance, I'm thinking like make sure you apply security patches,
Yeah.
So that would be for me like when I hear maintenance part. And the development, I was only thinking about writing code, but now that you just mentioned this, like, okay, we are using a lot of SaaS products in our organization. What about configuring this? Is this also falling into the development part of it? So I think some organizations that don't develop their own in-house solution should look at least at the configuration part.
Yeah. At least I can tell you that if you're a consultant right now, and this is the way they're stating these requirements is a consultancy dream, right? It's so vague that it's like you need a consultant to understand this. So maybe that is the initiator on this one.
So are you saying that the EU is giving consultants a lot of contract opportunities and projects?
I know that consultants, especially big firms, are very much involved in as experts in the creating of laws and regulations, right? So they're lobbying a lot. They have a lot of money for lobbying. So a lot of their tactics you see triple through, right? I think that's not too weird.
Do you expect in the future that the big consultancies, or maybe even a specific country, will develop a more clear set of definitions of what exactly does NIS to this part means, and what exactly does that mean, and how we implement it, and then other will follow this path and use their own definition? Or do you expect that EU will clarify these things in the future, and this is just version 1 and they will come with more clarifications?
I don't really think there comes a lot of clarification from the EU. I think we have a hope. Like if we have a country, let's say right now I'm in Denmark, so let's take Denmark. If Denmark comes out as one of the first with very specific laws and regulations around this, with very specific statements, I think most countries will start to adopt it, because that's been the trend always. Like as soon as one country does it, and all the other countries are like turning their heads, like, oh, can we steal stuff from here? So I think if countries are starting to really make this very specific, maybe they separate it to make very specific requirements, then we might be lucky and it will be copied. I don't think this European Union will come with any more specification in this.
Very interesting point. But let's cover the last part of this one, because I feel like we spent a lot of time on this one, which was, in my opinion, was 3 different points, not just one. But let's cover the vulnerability handling and disclosure.
Oh
yeah, not yet.
That's the next one. The next
so
one.
When I hear vulnerability handling and disclosure, I think it's quite a technical side of it. It involves quite a bit of knowledge on understanding the vulnerability and how you handle it and how you make sure that you disclose it properly and patch it, right? So how can, for example, a smaller company who maybe doesn't have a dedicated cybersecurity team make sure that they can handle the disclosure of vulnerabilities properly? Because, as I said, they don't have someone who is totally dedicated. They outsource most of their cybersecurity operations. What is a possible approach for a small company?
I mean, a very good question. First of all, again, a little statement on the fakeness of this. It states handling and disclosure. It doesn't state finding vulnerabilities. So I guess as long as you're not trying to search, then you won't find any. So you don't have to disclose anything. I think that's a good statement.
Do you think a lot of companies will play with this? Like, we don't do any pen testing or scanning, so we don't find, and because we don't find anything, we don't have to disclose anything.
I think this will definitely be. I don't think the majority of the companies will do it, but I think there will definitely be some people that will play into that, right? Because it's too fake. Yeah, for a small company, it's definitely going to be a little bit harder, right? So, if you're a small company, and most likely if you're a small company, then that means you are not directly NIS2 compliant, right? So a big vendor is asking you, what are you doing regarding NIS2? I think the downside of this is if you're a really small company and you're doing something critical in the supply chain, I think you might be excluded for the fact that you're small because you cannot do this, right? So companies are like, yeah, I cannot. We need to comply to the NIS2, and you as a small company, we cannot expect you to even, have the resources enough to work with this. So that means we cannot even include you in the process. And that's a trend you have been seeing going on with a lot of software acquisition in general, is where smaller SaaS companies, smaller software companies, they're losing to the big ones because people that need to comply, they can only choose the big ones because they only are the only ones with the resources to comply.
Exactly.
However, I think if you have some RT experience and you have a good story and you're looking at your vulnerabilities and you do some vulnerability management, I think your customer will most likely agree with you, right?
That's a good point.
Yeah, but I think NIS2 might be a little bit more, demanding on the market, especially on the critical markets where smaller companies will just be excluded in general.
Let's move on. A bit sad to hear that small companies might have a lot of problems with this one, but let's see the next one, because the next one is, I find it even more interesting. Basic hygiene practices and cybersecurity training. So the $1 million question is like, how do we define basic?
Yeah. And before I answer your question, I see this question in the chat. Like, what company size do you consider small? So if you take, again, the European definition, there are 3 kinds of small companies, and not all of them are that small per se. So most companies, most small companies are within the 1-person range, actually. So that's a 1-person company. You have the most of those. Then you have, next to that, you have till the 10 mark. So you have to the 10 employees. Those are basically considered micro companies. Okay. I think those will mostly be heard. Everything above 10 to 50, I think they call it medium-sized companies or something like that. After that, you kind of start having, maybe some capability to actually do something with it. But even up to 250 employees is still considered the SMB market, the SME market, so the small medium enterprises. So, but I think if you go beyond the 50 mark, I think you're gonna be fine. And I think small is definitely below 50. I think it's mostly below 10.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think a lot of these requirements might put a lot of pressure on these small companies, the one that have, for example, less than 50, to allocate much more resources in terms of money, and they might not have time, they don't have the resources, they don't have experience on how to handle and how to implement this. So it will be an interesting time to see how these small
Yeah,
companies will.
especially because it's 90% of the market. That makes it interesting. It's that much.
Coming back to the basic hygiene practices, Vincent, how do you define basic? How do you see it in your opinion? Because some people will say basic is like A, B, and C, and for the other companies that might be advanced, right? So, how would you define basic?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very interesting one. Like, this is even when if I'm doing consultancy, you get this question a lot. Like, customer or a company comes to me and like, yeah, I just want the basic thing, the basic cyber hygiene. Then I'm often asking the question, but what do you mean with basic? What is basic? Is MFA basic? Is MFA basic only on your critical application, or is it basic on all your application? What do you mean with basic? If you look at the NIS 2, since MFA is listed separately, we can show it to you. That is this one, right? It's listed separately from basic. Does that mean it's not basic? Right?
It appears so. Now that you say it, I would say it's not basic. It's more than basic. Because if it was basic, you wouldn't have to specify it. Additionally, it would be in that category, right?
Exactly. It same goes along with apparently asset management is not basic. Cryptography is not basic because it's all listed separately, right? So at least we can determine based on what they're saying here what is not basic. But I think again, this is one of those extremely weird definition, like statements. Like, what do you mean with basic? It's beyond me what they mean with this.
So everything that you consider is basic, but still it's not in all the other NIS 2 categories. That might be a definition of basic.
Yeah.
How about cybersecurity training? Like, I hear a lot of people in the industry, just to highlight the importance of cybersecurity training, especially, for example, for phishing, and which cybersecurity trainings do you think would make sense in terms of NIS 2? Like, would you see phishing awareness should be on top of it? Should it be like password management? Which trainings should be up there for companies to cover this aspect?
Yeah, so I mean, if it's really risk-based, right? Like we assume it's risk-based, and you read the industry reports like the Verizon data breach report, then I think not phishing, but password management training should be like the number one thing people should train on. Phishing is actually comparable if you look at the risk report, even though we make a lot of noise about it. It's actually one of the less used. It's still in the top, but it's definitely not the top 3 used threats that's out there. It's password management. It's insecure web applications. Actually, those 2 are the biggest one. So this page you should be mostly looking at cybersecurity training from that perspective, like what is happening the most in your in your industry, what is the biggest threat, and you should focus your training specifically on that. In practice, I think this will just mean that companies will buy a random tool from the market and they will go through the standard packages and they will just use the standard packages, right?
So you would expect the cybersecurity training industry in business to business to boom in the next years, especially because a lot of companies would like to be compliant with this part. So the easiest thing is like, okay, find a vendor that provides cybersecurity training, and it's a check in the box for us to be compliant with this part.
Yeah, I think they will just do any kind of training just to make a
Mhm.
statement that they're training.
I see.
But if you do it right and it's risk management, then you should really be really picky about what you're training on. I don't think that will happen. I think they will just take any kind of tool, take the standard trainings that they offer, and then push it out to the employees, right?
I see. I
Um,
see. That is a bit unfortunate, but I wouldn't be surprised if that would be the case. Yeah.
I mean, at least it's better than for people that didn't have training yet, right? So a lot of people are not receiving training. Um, so for in that sense, it's kind of nice, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if we have more questions in the chat because I cannot see the chat. And my questions are kind of finished, but maybe you want to cover one more if we have enough time.
I mean, maybe you can do like a last few minutes, 3 minutes, maybe on the last one that you found interesting, the MFA one.
Yeah.
And
Do you want to read it?
yeah, do you really? Such a poor sentence. So
Let's do that.
yeah, the use of multi-factor authentication or continuously authentication solution. Interesting one. Secured voice, video, and text communications, and secured emergency communication systems within the entity where appropriate.
Where appropriate. Okay.
Very interesting statement.
Very good statement. Where appropriate.
I mean, I can already highlight some very interesting things, right? Like use of multi-factor or continuously authentication. Right?
So multi-factor is not actually mandatory.
No, you can do continuously authentication solutions, but the question is, what do you mean with that? Like I think last time when we were practicing this, you mentioned, yeah, that could be the the fact that you have to re-log in your account all the time.
Exactly, because I see a lot of like web applications that I'm pen testing. They like require user to re-log in every day or every 8 hours or every time they get back to the office, right? So I'm thinking maybe, okay, if you cannot do multi-factor, this is like at least ask users to re-authenticate, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I see in the chat, like, is that not SSO?
Okay.
Personally, I don't know. I think it's a very interesting one. I'm just super confused by that or statement. That or statement really throws me off, right? I don't know what you think about that, but I think that's it's a weird one.
I think it would bring much more value if it was only MFA. Then people will already know, okay, we need to do MFA. Now this is creating more confusion, I would say. And how do you understand continuous re-authentication? You know, like everyone can have their own definition, but MFA is quite universally understood, right?
Yeah.
So in my opinion, I think it would be better if you focus on the MFA part, and that should cover pretty much all of your risk assessment.
Yeah. Yeah. Good question again. So in the chat, the question has been said, is it SSO? Then the answer was no. And then the big question, what is it then? Yeah, I don't know. I think it's a very interesting question. Like, what do they mean here? I'm not really sure. I'm also confused by this statement, of course. They have it never else, but here they have where appropriate. Do they mean where appropriate on this part? Right? Or do they mean where appropriate on the whole sentence?
Yes.
What do they mean with where appropriate?
Exactly. Well, from my experience, like when I was testing old systems, there were cases where the applications did not support. They were such old applications that didn't support MFA. So I'm thinking maybe they mentioned this where appropriate, in the sense that if the application can support it, if there is an option to enable it.
Yeah. Also, what you see here in the chat is based on risk assessment. I think it's a little bit of both, right? So it's where it's possible, where it's appropriate, and what is based on risk. But the fact that these are risk management measures, I think this statement is just, these two words are just really weird. Because based on that, the fact that the risk management measures, you kind of need to write it at every statement. But apparently it's only interesting in this statement. So that kind of throws me off.
Yeah, I'm curious I would really love to be in the discussion room when this Article 21 was agreed, and how everyone in that room voted that where appropriate should be added to exactly this statement, you know.
Yeah. Another interesting thing, and I think we'll keep it at that then, is the secured emergency communication systems. I think most organizations don't really have that, like the secured emergency communication systems. Does that mean, like in business continuity, you know, like you often have like this channel which you can use in case of emergency if everything goes down? I think it's a good practice, but it's very specific. I don't think a lot of organizations have this one. It's an interesting one.
Yeah, again, going back to the small and micro organizations that are below 50 employees, I think this is another aspect that could bring a lot of pressure on them on like, okay, how do we implement this? How many resources do we need to allocate for specifically this point? So really curious to see what would be their approach.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think we're going to wrap up now. All in all, I would say it's like, you don't have to be all too afraid of the NIS 2. It's very unspecific, open to interpretation. It's a consultancy paradise, right? So I think, you know, like, and that's especially what you see on LinkedIn or social media in general. You get like, people are really like, oh, you need to comply now, and this is the danger, and compliance now needed. But once you start reading in it, and yeah, it's not that scary. It's kind of weird.
And I think many of the companies that are already compliant with another security requirements, they already cover many of these. So it's not something that they should be scared of.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if you have any last questions, just ask us. And further, you can click the links on the presentation to read some more. And after this, we will send you an email also with some more earlier webinars we did, but also with the presentation and the link. So you can always read it back or send it out, whatever you want to do with it. So it in the trash can, whatever you prefer.
I will upload the presentation, the recording of this presentation to the YouTube channel. So maybe tomorrow it should be ready to be viewed and re-listened to if anyone wants to do that.
Yeah. So thanks for joining, guys, and hope to see you in the next webinar.
Likewise. Thank you, Vincent.